much for staying until the very end. We saved the best for last, I think. And this is a special event that we added on to the end of the Concord this year. When I first moved to Seal Rock 6 years ago, for health reasons, for my departing husband, I was getting to know things that were available, and I went to the drugstore in Newport, and I was surprised to find a lovely turntable that was filled with books of poems. And so I started looking at this, and I saw books by Ralph Salisbury and Ingrid Wendt, and I had been a graduate student at the University of Oregon many years ago, and the names rang a bell. In those days, there was a pretty distinct separation between people who were studying literary criticism and people who were creative writers, and the two did not mingle and the two did not meet. So I was in literary criticism, but I had an office next to Ralph Salisbury, and I remembered him, and I remembered his name, and then I did actually have a bell go off for Ingrid too, so I thought, well, this is pretty wonderful. These people, you know, have books in the drugstore. It impressed me. So I just sort of kept my ears open, and pretty soon Willamette Riders, I think sponsored by Dorothy Mack, had a reading, and it was Ralph Salisbury. So I went, and it was a great reading, and so I went up afterwards and I said, you won't remember this to Ralph, but 35 years ago, I had an office next to you at University of Oregon, and Ralph was so charming, and he pretended to remember me. I can't believe he really did, but I was just thrilled. And we all got sort of reunited and reacquainted, and Ralph and Ingrid have been enormous supporters of the Concord over the years. And one thing that I always enjoy about the Concord is the sort of webs of interconnection that emerge, and there's a kind of genealogy to the writing of poetry. And so one thing that has become very clear over these 4 years is that Ralph is the father of many poets, and the influence has been very strong. So I was thrilled when we thought of doing this tribute to Ralph today as a part-time resident of Seal Rock and a friend of the Concord. So I won't hold you much longer with my comments. I'll turn you over to Ingrid, who will coordinate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and tremendous thanks to you for not just this event, but the whole Concord. I think I'm not alone in saying thank you. It's been wonderful. It's been a huge job for you, and you also have some wonderful volunteers, and we thank them. But I think I'd like all of us to applaud Sandra. Thanks also to the readers who are participating today, the former students of Ralph Salisbury at the University of Oregon. I'd like to thank Stephen Blue for videotaping us, and all of you for being here. It's really quite thrilling. And I should add a postscript to what Sandy said about the books at the drugstore. Ralph and I discovered last summer the drugstore has changed owners, and the book racks have disappeared, and along with maybe 10 books by each of us. So we have to try to get those back somehow. But you know, I didn't know that story, Sandy. That's a good one. Okay, I'm not going to take too much more time talking. The plan is that you have the program in your hands, except Erik Muller's name didn't get in there at the very end because I was trying to get it all on 2 pages, and I was adding and subtracting and moving. Erik Muller is also going to be presenting today, and many of you have seen him here and seen his books in the bookstore or book fair, and you've heard him talk and read. So I hope that will suffice. I'm sorry, Erik. I will begin with a short biographical statement by Ralph, about Ralph. For those of you who do not know him personally, Ralph taught at the University of Oregon from 1960 to 1994. And during that time, he helped create the MFA program at the University of Oregon, was director of the MFA program at the University of Oregon for many years, and was also the editor-in-chief of Northwest Review. Ralph, I'm going to say a little bit more about him besides his work as a teacher. Born of a Cherokee Shawnee storyteller, singer, father, and a storytelling Irish-American mother, Ralph Salisbury grew up hunting and trapping for meat and pelts, and working on a family farm in Iowa, which had no electricity or running water, but was reachable by a dirt road. His first publication, based on his Native American heritage, was a poem in the New Yorker titled "In the Children's Museum in Nashville," a poem published by the New Yorker years before the contemporary Native American literary movement came into being. Among the many anthologies publishing his poetry, fiction, and autobiographical essays are Identity Lessons, Speaking for Ourselves, Song of the Turtle, and Earth Song, Sky Spirit. Professor Emeritus at the University of Oregon, Ralph is the author of 3 books of poems and 10 books of short stories. No, sorry, got that mixed up. I wasn't looking. I know this. 3 books of short stories and 10 books of poems. And the most recent, oh gosh, the most recent is on tape. The most recent is Blind Pupper at the Well, poems 2008, The Indian Who Bombed Berlin, stories 2009, and Light from a Bullet Hole, poems new and selected, 2009, nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. And a new book of poems, Living in the Mouth, has been accepted by the Habit of Rainy Nights Press and will appear later this year. Ralph's awards include a Rockefeller Foundation residency in Bellagio, Italy, the Chapelbrook Award, the Northwest Poetry Award, 3 Fulbright professorships in Germany, a Research Fulbright Award to Norway, and an Amherst USIS lectureship in India. Selecting his book Rainbows of Stone as an Oregon Book Award finalist for poetry, Judge Maxine Kuhlman wrote, "His book deserves a broad audience." Ralph's most recent news, his book-length memoir, So Far So Good, has won the River Teeth Book Award for Literary Nonfiction, a national award, and will be published by the University of Nebraska Press in spring 2013. The way we're going to do this is that we're going to have presenters in the order in which they appear in your biographical notes. And we're not going to be reading them out loud, but they are there for you, and that will save some time because we have about an hour planned here and it's already 12:15. So we'll do what we can. And I will begin by reading statements by 4 people who could not be here, but they sent their words. And then the first reader after that will be Joan Dobbie. And Joan, when you finish reading, you could announce the name of the next reader, and so on and so forth. Those of you who are reading, if you wouldn't mind. And Erik Muller is going to be in there somewhere where the M belongs, after K, after Roger Moody. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Alice Austen says, Ralph directed my honors thesis at Oregon, a novella. I was deciding whether to go to law school or not, and I remember Ralph telling me that a writer can always use life experience. I did go to law school and I practiced law, but I never stopped writing, and I know this is in no small measure because of Ralph's encouragement and support. his assurance that my writing was worthwhile, that the act of writing is a grace. Every writer needs a mentor like Ralph, and I feel truly blessed. I'm now a playwright and screenwriter, and I've finally written that novel. Every time I sit down to begin a new project, I remember that the beginning and the end will inevitably be a bit self-conscious and might even need to be cut. I pay attention to the rhythm of words, making sure I don't have serial staccato sentences, unless for good reason. I cannot abide the word suddenly, or other heterological words that in no way sound like themselves. I am guarded in my use of adverbs, but most of all, I make sure that what I am writing is from my heart. Thank you, Ralph, from Austen. Diane Averill, who really wanted to be here. She lives in Portland. Ralph, you were the key figure in my maturing as a poet. Your nurturing extended outside of workshops and personal visits into encouragement of me as an individual. You really went to bat for me when I applied for a teaching assistant position for my second year. And it was only because of you that I received one of two poetry slots rather than one of the many composition appointments. In addition to that, I was terrified at the end of the 2 years when I was ready to teach, and you said I would be a good teacher for many reasons, but the main one was that I was a good person. I remember the workshops very vividly. You treated each graduate student as an individual and tried to help us develop each in our own voice. You helped us to be more concise, thus bringing the poem out of the extra words or phrases which merely clung to the core of the poem. Sometimes you showed us different views by literally sitting in a different place in the circle, thus changing the dynamics. I don't know what would have happened to my life without you, dearest professor. With great fondness, Diane Averill. Olga Broumas. My dear Ralph, you are with me daily as I strive to teach, with your unparalleled generosity and equanimity. To match your example of finding the line, word, stanza, rhythm, the smallest phrase animating my poem, the one that sparked the impossible fulfilled in this world, and praised it for all its real and imagined activity in the expansive world of your listening and imagination. You showed me what to look for, grow, what feed or starve, how to best hear and trust. Today I turn 63, and it has been 40 years since I sat in your office. But your student has never stopped listening and hearing. Have a blessed day, surrounded by the hearts and love of all you fostered. Mine are there with you, as I prepare to hand out my diplomas to the best crop of young poets in much life. May all you desire continue arriving, to all you embrace and thrive. A Greek bear hug to you and Ingrid. Olga. And one more, and then I'll turn this over to Joan Dobbie, and then others will follow. Patty Dann. Ralph literally opened a door and changed my life. In September of 1972, when I was 19 years old, I drove across the country from New York, not stopping, in a car full of people I did not know, driving 80 miles an hour, arriving in Eugene 3 days later. We stole corn from a farmer's field, swam in the Willamette River, and I slept better than I had in years. I was lonely and scared, and I wanted to be a writer. I registered to be a student at the U of O and wandered into the writing department and shyly walked down the hall. One door was partially open, Ralph's. I knocked, and he stood up and gave me his beautiful smile. We sat side by side at his desk, and I hesitantly showed him a short story I was working on. All he said was, "Why don't you come by my workshop tomorrow afternoon? Just right." We sat side by side at his desk, and I worked with Ralph for the next 3 years, and his remarkable ear and remarkable generosity was and remains like a gentle hand on my back. I moved back to New York, I'll never know why, but as I sit at my desk and look out at the Hudson River, and I'm scared, Ralph's voice is still in my ears, just right. I thank you, Ralph, for opening the door, and now that I'm the age you were when you opened the door, I hope I can do the same for young writers and tell them, just right, just right. Now, I'll turn this over to Joan Dobbie, and then she will announce next readers.
Who will be Barbara? All right. Disconnect. That fell out. I'll talk very loud. Can you hear me? No. No? No. Very dramatic beginning.
Yes.
Leave it in there. I will leave it forever.
Hi, sorry for that. I'm Joan, and I came to Eugene in 1983, I believe it was, and then something like 1987, I decided to go to graduate school, and I had known about Ralph, and I had known about Ingrid, and they were like famous poets. And when I got to graduate school, Ralph was my teacher, he was head of the department, and I'm going to read 2 poems to you. One of them is the one poem I remember from workshop that he said, Joan, this is the best poem you've ever written. And he was not easy with his compliments like that. So this is a poem that I wrote, not for Ralph, but for my own father. And it's a sonnet, and it's called First Father Sonnet. You were not there when I was born. Alone, after 3 days' labor, she spit me out. Alone, I lay between her legs. No son, but another daughter. This one dark. About as dark as any Jew. I looked like you. Dad, were you thankful, or only relieved when you arrived with your instruments to cut the snake from my belly? And she heaved me up to her chest, plugging my mouth with her breast like a gag against crying. Crying never accepted in our house. We were meant to be happy, but you didn't smile, and I couldn't. Dad, what is this weight I carry? Whose burden? Heavy as an unborn child. So I walked tall that day, he told me it was good. I'm reading one more poem. This one is to Ralph, and this one is a beginning poem. It's not nearly finished, written on Hallmark paper. Eagles for Ralph. Ralph, did you know that this year on Skinner's Butte, the bald eagles have nested? 3 handsome chicks, so I hear, easily visible to the naked eye. In fact, from her 6th floor window, my student looked up just as an eagle swept by within feet of the glass. Ralph, last night at the restaurant table, I saw Ingrid, her hand like a wing on your shoulder, how she holds you in her heart. Together you've written and published, inspired and taught, parents together, grandparents together, our daughters together in school. All my years in Eugene, like high-flying eagles, you too have graced my personal sky. Finally nesting up close, now we're friends. I thank you for being. And next will be Barbara Dick. Drake.
Before I start, I want to pass around a couple of pictures. Well, it's one picture, but I have more than one copy, just so you can see Ralph and Ingrid, because I feel like in paying tribute to Ralph, I need to pay tribute to both of them, because they're a wonderful couple, sweethearts forever. So, pass this along. Just hand them around.
This is an old town hall, a double town hall.
I think it's just such an adorable picture, and confirms that Ralph is quite a fox. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Is the mic working? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I have a lot of good memories of Ralph, as well as Ralph and Ingrid, and I was still an undergraduate when he came to University of Oregon, but I was just about graduating. And then I went a year of graduate school, and then I went away for a couple of years, and then I came back and finished. So I worked with him quite a lot. And he introduced some very egalitarian spirit into the writing classes, where he took us off campus. And we met sometimes in the room at the college side in, what's that what it's called? Yeah, up the coffee shop where people would hang out at the edge of campus. And we, what?
Taylor's?
No, it was the side.
Oh, yeah.
The side. It had a kind of balcony area around it, and then a room that you could get into and drink coffee and so on. And there was something wonderful about the idea that we could leave the school and have a class, and we were still legitimate, and so that was wonderful. And I remember Ralph, a very vivid mental picture of him when my first husband and I were living in this kind of scurrilous old house that was soon condemned with a lot of people, and we had a little apartment we lived in on the top, and Ralph and Earl Burney, who was visiting at that time, came, suggested we all get together and read poetry. And so we gathered up there, and it felt like a very exotic evening, you know, that we were beatniks in whatever year that was, early 60s. And that it was wonderful that students and professors could get together and take turns reading poetry. Maybe that doesn't sound uncommon to you, but it did seem uncommon at the time. And we were very egalitarian, except that most of us were drinking beer. But I remember Ralph pulled out of his pocket a little silver flask with whiskey in it. So that showed that he was the teacher. And later on, when I came back to graduate school, and there wasn't an MFA at that point, but then it came on soon as I graduated, and I quickly changed my graduate studies from literature to the MFA, and I realized that otherwise I would have to memorize 400 titles of bibliography. Kester Stenson, so I didn't want to do that. I remember when I was pregnant, I was teaching and taking classes, and I had just ridden my bicycle from Moss Street, their campus downtown, to my doctor's appointment that week, and I was had one more week to go of school in the spring, and I thought, well, I can wait, right? And the doctor said, no, it's time today for you to go to the hospital. So I rode my bicycle home, so my husband could drive me to the hospital. And I stopped by at the English department to pick up some papers I knew I was going to have to grade while I was in the hospital. And I saw Ralph, and he told me that my short story, Short Flight, would have been accepted for the Northwest Review. And that was the first time I had a short story accepted. And so I was very happy. So I biked on home and went, and my daughter Monica was born a few hours later. And she's a writer today, right? And there were many visits over the years between Michigan and Oregon when I lived back there. And my husband and Joan would show up at their door. And we always ended up spending the night. And, 5 people just show up, no advance warning, and Ingrid always cooked something wonderful, and I remember many of her dishes. Really, when I love something I eat, I always remember it. And so what we always did when we got together, just as our undergraduate meetings and our meetings at the apartment, and every time, we always read poetry together. And so I really appreciate the model of the Ralph said, that poets get together and they read poetry together and appreciate one another. And even if that ends up having them spend the night at your house, right? So I'll just read one little poem here. It's a poem that I wrote for my own husband over here. But I think it celebrates the spirit of Ralph and Ingrid as well and their relationship. It's called Love Over 60. Here's to the slippery and the stiff, the biscuit and the fish, the tight and the loose and the in-between. Here's to remembering and looking forward and the size of the moment, the round and the soft and the saggy of the moment, the wrinkles like a well-used map of the moment. Treasure the blur of seeing up close and the distance in the lens. Blessed be the furry and the fuzzy, the hairless and the taut, the slow and the fast, and whatever comes next. Let the race be to the leisurely, the silk and the wool and the cotton, the pills and the table, the magazine, the now and the then and more often, the wrinkled sheet, the coffee in bed, the toenail in the armpit, the thumb joints in the arches, the bathroom and the leaky flashing around the chimney, the sound of the refrigerator humming like an old song, and all the rest of it. Oh yeah, Cecelia.
Hi. Well, like Patty Dann, I moved out to Oregon from the East Coast to go to graduate school, and the airlines lost my luggage, and I didn't have a place to live, and I borrowed a bicycle, which was a 10-speed, and I didn't know how to ride a 10-speed, so I kept falling off it. So it was kind of a rocky beginning. I mean, I loved it all, but when I met Ralph, he was just so welcoming and kind, and referred to me as a poet when he would introduce me, because he did that with all of us. And that, maybe in graduate school, that's like, a poet, really? So that was very nice. And at a workshop, I remember he would always speak after everyone else, we went around the table, and he would be the last to speak, because he didn't want to, put too much of a print on anything by pronouncing the poem flawed or perfect or whatever it was. And that, he was really, like, we were a little school of fishes, and he was guiding us, but in this very subtle, sweet way, and I appreciate that very much. And John Hayslip would do this also. Ralph had a very nice way of sitting, when you went to his office to, with work study or work, what was it called? Study conference, that he would read your poem out loud. And it was as if you were looking over the shoulder of a reader, which is such a gift when you're a new poet. And he would read your poem and then pause at places and, marvel or puzzle at the piece. So it was just a wonderful way to learn. And in the spirit of keeping this brief, I'll just read an early poem of mine. This was the first poem that I got published, and I'm sure Ralph's hand is in here. It's called The Coat. I chose it over cast-off furs and sad cloth plaids in the Salvation Army store and wore it home. Mother covered the stenciled name and number of some strange sailor with dense navy blue satin. But the coat wore his fingerprints. Our hands held hands in the pockets. His change jingled with mine. On chilly nights we walked to the shelter of the Norfolk Arcade. We bent our heads together to view the nickel movies, and the crooks of the sleeves grew damp as my sailor and I embraced through the dark satin lining. Next up is Diane and Krysl.
Who from Colorado writes, I was a freshman studying Shakespeare's plays, reading Auden, Gertrude Stein's Sacha, and at a conscious level I was living the thrilling life of the mind. But I entered university with almost no worldly knowledge whatsoever. Ralph was my first poetry prof. I'd won a full tuition scholarship to University of Oregon for poems I'd written in high school. And on the strength of this prize, Ralph invited me to take his 400-level poetry workshop. I remember no details of craft from that workshop, but I do remember his encouraging voice and his warmth, which set me at ease. I also remember his extravagant praise for the image of a collapsed umbrella as a metaphor for something I now can't remember. My junior year, I became deeply depressed and unconsciously sought attention by pouting, cutting my Shakespeare class, changing my major to political science and pouting some more. Though I don't know the details, I do know that Ralph spoke up for me when other English profs had no patience with my attitude. And when I applied to the graduate creative writing program, Ralph continued to defend me in spite of my crazed psyche and to believe in my potential. Most of all, I appreciate the small, significant details he would point out in my drafts. And because I too eventually became a professor, I know well just how much patience he kindly spent critiquing my work in progress. Ralph Salisbury had lived a harrowing life, and he recognized my utter lack of sophistication. I was too innocent and myopic then to understand how fortunate I was, but later, when I heard the testimonies from both female and male students who'd been in one way or another exploited by their teachers or simply ignored, I realized that Salisbury had respected me, honored, and nurtured me. He'd saved my inner life, the life that matters. And he's done that by urging me to read and write my way through life's inevitable suffering and to transform it into soul. It's humbling to realize that my progress through the MFA and through my entire teaching career depended so crucially on just one key, sensitive, discerning, patient, loyal, and insistently encouraging person. And I am delighted that at his august age, he has just written another award-winning book. And next will be Roger Moody.
Thank you, Ingrid. I hope that's not too loud. I'm not really very fond of microphones. 5 minutes. 5 minutes is not enough time to praise my friend and teacher, Ralph Salisbury. I remember I came to Oregon in '74, and in '76 I began the graduate writing program. That first term, I had written, I filled up an entire page with writing, not so much poetry but prose, about my grandparents' family farm. And I showed it to Ralph along with a couple other poems in private conference. And I walked out of the room with about 3 lines, maybe 30 words, which is seemed to be a frequent experience showing Ralph poems in private conference. He actually, I should also say that, okay, I'm 26 and didn't know what I was doing. All I had going for me really was desire to be a writer, but I didn't know what I was doing at all. I wasn't ready for a grad workshop. I really wasn't. And what I learned from Ralph in those private conferences and in the workshop was, well, more than private conferences, how to find the heart of the first draft. And that's been invaluable to me ever since. So I want to go on to thank Ralph for his example as a poet and teacher, and to thank him for his example as a World War II veteran. His response to the experience of being a teenager in World War II, I think it's invaluable. And it's in his work. You've seen it in his poetry and his prose. I don't know why, but I'm really nervous. I love to read. I'm not nervous when I read, but talking about Ralph, I'm nervous. Because I want to thank him as well for his, for years he was on the board of directors of my press, Service Review Press, that I began as a literary magazine in '78. I wanted a way to keep in touch with writers, so I began a magazine that published chapbooks, and by '95, I began to publish full-length books. But Ralph was very gracious and generous to even consider bothering to come to these annual meetings where I provide a lot of food and several bottles of wine and the other guys. So we might be able to do what I wanted to do as the founder. But so very sloppy notes here. Yeah, really, I want to thank Ralph and Ingrid both for their friendship over the years since I graduated. It's really been invaluable to me. Many dinners and wasn't mentioned, but I'm the publisher of Light from the Bullet Hole, the new and selected poems. And that was a great treat to work with Ralph on that, going through the 10 books, reading them all aloud and selecting poems and comparing with his selection. It was a really, really good experience. And I'll just read one poem. This is for my son, Julian. It's called Simple Love. Memories circle my body, a lost blackbird. I see my father when I yell at my son. He's sluggish in the morning, not slow-witted, just a little too willing to let the events of the day unfold without him. I'm for his struggle. I see him attentive in my daydreams. I want to be as cunning as the rudder of a sailboat. I'll tuck the corners of his angry heart. I'll tack the corners of his angry heart. I'll walk ahead of him with a bag of tricks. I'll turn his eyes inward where he'll find strength. I'll yell from the crow's nest of the soul for him to open his arms to the double world of mirrors. God, I should put my glasses on. I can't read 12 point anymore. My glasses. Thank you, Ralph.
Thanks, Roger.
You're welcome.
I got my glasses on. Roger is one of many people in Eugene who make up, I think, a very rich poetry culture. And certainly Ingrid and Ralph are a major part of that, too. When we talk, as Sandy did, of genealogy, we both put in, to look at us, enough years at this that we really can think in terms of generations and succession of students, of books, of honors, of decades, Ralph, and of a tribute like this afternoon's. I'm here because I'm part of that genealogy. I took a class from Ralph in 1963, actually winter quarter of, would have been 64. I think Barbara is the earliest student of Ralph's, right, if I'm phrasing that correctly, present, and I will be the second. I'll although I probably took fewer hours with Ralph than anybody who was a student. I took 1 class. I was a literary critic, and I was also a poet, but I took a 400 level workshop. We sat around a big table in Friendly Hall, and the word friendly is definitely a rubric for Ralph Salisbury. I remember the smile, who couldn't. I remember the wonderful sweep of hair, and there's still plenty of it still there. There was something sort of silver and warm about this guy. Even back in '63, I'm still seeing him sort of as a light blonde or silver-haired gent. In 1963, I may have my photographs wrong, but that's how I remember it. One of the things I wanted to comment on, and it's a little different because I don't have a lot to say about Ralph's tutoring me. I'm very happy to be in this community. I'm very happy to see his successes. I'm very happy to get feedback from him as well as from Ingrid. I want to just comment on what poetry felt like in 1963. Our textbook was The New Poets of England and America, Donald Hall. I don't think since then there's ever been an anthology that combined English and American poetry. They're two different poetries separated by the same language, no doubt about it. And they're not commingled for a writing workshop. They were then. Bly was in there, Wright was in there. They were writing rhymed quatrains, and of course Wright continued to do that or returned to that later, but Bly shunned it. So we were looking at some things that were already phasing out. The canon was tight. The canon was white. The canon was male. And there was no discussion of ethnicity, gender, or race. Nor could we speak about the war, you know, which was fairly present. We were protesting the Vietnam War at that time. But Ralph, as a teacher, he was a fine, supportive teacher, but he was not offering his World War II experience. He was not offering his interesting background, Irish, Cherokee. Even the word story or storytelling, which is totally overused these days, was not current. People didn't talk about having a story or telling a story or the importance of stories. There was something vitiated about that culture. And the great thing that has happened, of course, is that we've all grown. And Ralph has been a leader in that, carrying a banner, you know, into new areas of genre, mixing genres, and saying unabashedly, this is who I am, these are the materials that I'm going to explore. But that was not happening in 1963. So if you're thinking about, you know, the Republican primaries and stuff like that, there's no progress and blah, 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 it's just a throwback in every field. I would have to say, at least among our poets, we're getting a little smarter. It's taken a while. It's been 50 years. So genealogy, right? At that time, as Barbara was saying. Let me read a poem from that time. And Barbara Ross is the next reader or the next person to be reported on. This is a poem from that time, and I rented a house on the Jasper Road across from the Natron Mill. There was a TV burner there, and there was a central fork of the Willamette River. Mount Pisgah was there, but it wasn't a park yet, so nobody ever looked at it. Just a weird situation, you know, just a weird situation. But there was a back area that was let out for sheep in the winter. And there was old boxes and crates. We made bookcases out of them. And there was an old harrow in the middle of a field. And this is the poem from that period. I don't know if Ralph had an eye on this poem or not. He gave me one piece of advice with our one activity together at his office. He says, you need to look at William Carlos Williams a little more seriously. Because I was writing in a frost line. It's an easy thing to say, but when I sit on the old harrow, deserted in the middle of the field, and think of horse thighs that worked once within arm's reach, and look ahead at woods so thin I see through them all the way across America, in confusion, I have to say, I would have done it differently. Thank you.
Texas, currently, in praise of Ralph Salisbury. Ralph Salisbury was the perfect teacher for a student like me, terrified and desperate to write. His kindness, his openness, his support made the making of poems seem possible for all of us in that remarkable class of 1973 to 75, who were struggling with our poetic voices, among other things. Some of us, like me, I think, struggled more than others, and Ralph's gentle critique always shined a light on a path ahead. Ralph had a terrific knowledge of poetry, and his suggestions of who to read gave us models and ideas, places to range with our poems that we couldn't have imagined any other way. Those 2 years I spent at the University of Oregon writing and studying with Ralph stand out as years that gave me the courage and vision to keep on pursuing the crazy dream of writing poems that maybe one day someone might even read. Thank you, Ralph. I couldn't have done it without you. Barbara Ross. Our next speaker and reader is Frank Rossini.
So I'd like to continue the testimony for the canonization of Ralph Salisbury. Father Ralph, as you were just earlier. There were just a couple of things that I wanted to say about Ralph. I've been a teacher, or I was a teacher, for 43 years. And when I first met Ralph, I had been teaching for about 7 years, and I had also been writing poetry. I guess I was going for poetry for about 7 years. And I got into the MFA program and started to go to MFA workshops. And MFA workshops, one thing about them is the people in them had a lot of passion. They had a fair amount of ego. And they had a little bit of, I'm not sure if this is the word, but if it is a word, pomposity. And there were times when things would get very heated in those workshops. And particularly, I think, the males, you know, I mean, it was just sometimes. And I learned from Ralph, and I took this into my teaching, what I later called the Tai Chi method of teaching. And that is when the students come at you with force, you don't meet them with force. You know, you meet them, you let that force just kind of go through. And you let them sort of let that force play out. And Ralph was a master at doing that. You know, a word here, a silence here, and always this just total atmosphere of inner strength. And I always tried in my own teaching, and sometimes it was very hard, to practice that, those same things. In terms of teaching of poetry, and I think Roger touched on this already, he was the master of, you walked in with a poem, you know, 40-line poem, you walked out with 2 lines, and you felt really good. Because you knew you had 2 really good lines. And the other thing he was a master of is he knew when you were faking it, when you hadn't done the work, and you brought something in, and he'd say, this is not really very good at all. You know, and you knew he was right. But as a teacher, and as a teacher of writing, and I taught for many years at community college with adults coming back to school and whatnot, the one thing I kind of learned from that is that I needed to look not at all the mistakes people were making, but I needed to find those places in their writing where they were really writing from the heart, where there was some craft, and sometimes they didn't even recognize that craft. And sometimes it would amaze me, and to let them know that that was there in their writing. Because that's what Ralph always felt was a master of doing. And the third thing that he's teaching me now, I retired teaching 2 years ago, and it was that moment of, okay, what are you going to do now? And then I thought of Ralph. writes every day, and he's doing what he loves, and I said, that's it, I'm just going to keep writing. I do photography, try to grow tomatoes, but just keep at it, because that's what's important. So those are things that I really, really value in terms of him as a teacher and how he helped me as a teacher over a long teaching career. So I wanted to read this poem. It's an older poem, which of course I spent the last week revising before I read it in front of Ralph. And we'll workshop after this. Okay? So this was a poem I wrote about teaching and working with adults that are coming back to school and working with writing. And it's called Learning to Paint. In basic English, my students fight nouns, verbs, the idea of a sentence. A 40-year-old woman who can bead intricate ancestral designs is near tears. A 30-year-old man who's lost his job, who knows the grammar of machines, shrugs and holds his head. I tell them my story of learning to paint, how I hate my teacher, her ease with the brush, how her trees look like trees, her bamboo like eloquent characters on a Chinese scroll. In my hand, the brush is a cat, going its own way, imperious in its disdain. I try to think how Lao Tzu thinks, bend like the willow to my frustration. But my willow looks like that cat, and I want to smash the ink against the wall and shout, "That is art!" We laugh, our heads nodding like leaves in slow, sure fall of rain. Thank you.
Maxine Scates. Some years ago, after Ralph had retired and was closing his office down, knowing for many years before that I loved the work of Miklos Radnati, he made me a gift of his long out-of-print copy of Radnati's work, which I deeply appreciated, and a gift which makes me think of the ways gestures like this one travel through the years in a community such as ours. Ralph was my teacher, and in 1975, toward the end of my 2 years in the MFA program, Ralph told me that I was getting my voice. I was thrilled because he told me that Frank Rossini, whose poems were already full of music, was getting his too. And I was more than happy to be in the same category as Frank. But also I think it was because, as I recall, Ralph didn't say much in workshop. He watched and listened as we discussed our poems. And I was happy he'd come to that conclusion, which I took as a form of praise from a teacher whose own distinct voice I admire. He also urged me to read Charles Olson. And though I didn't do it for many years, I wished I had done so earlier when I finally did read him, and thinking of Ralph's advice to do so. Evidence to me of just how his presence among us resonated through the years. When he spoke, we listened. Mark Thalman's next.
When I think of Ralph, I think of the word prolific. When I was an undergraduate, and I worked with Ralph as an undergraduate and graduate at the University of Oregon, I attended every reading Ralph gave, and I've attended many readings since then. And only once have I ever heard him repeat a poem. So he's got so much material, I can't imagine what hasn't been published. I also remember Ralph's sagely advice. Never get an editor mad at you. Or, when writing, always go from the general to the intimate. Use action as a metaphor. And Ralph gave the example, he kissed her so hard, her hat fell off. Also, never pet a deer. It might give you poison oak. Once going over a poem of mine in his office, he taught me the difference between the words cement and concrete, which I was using incorrectly. Ralph has always been a great role model. I probably wouldn't be a teacher today if it wasn't for Ralph. May we all be so prolific and still be publishing book after book well into our 80s. And Ralph and I also share quadruple bypasses, except I think he's got more than I have. This poem is about Ralph, and it comes about from a photo that Ingrid sent me. It's called Where Water Laps the Shore. With sunbonnet and green plastic watering can, the little girl is too young to understand that her grandfather's hand she holds was once struck by lightning. Signed Air Force induction papers, so he, underage, part Cherokee, could leave the Iowa farm where he hunted and have enough to eat. Ride in the bellies of bombers, a gunner, fingers flexing triggers to blast a Zero or Messerschmitt. Behind his back, racks of bombs ready, a different thunderstorm. All this matters, but to her, having enough water is important. The liquid she holds is like time. Deep moving currents take thousands of years to circulate around the globe and flow into her pitcher. She knows grandfather's grin beneath the gray trimmed mustache and begins to rinse his sandy feet. Their histories like water converge, mingle. What better present could either of them ask?
Veach is the next student who wanted to be here. She lives in Massachusetts and wasn't able to make it. I wish it wasn't so far and I could just pop over. Please give Ralph my best and tell him he is the best. His smile is what I think of most when I think of him. His knowing smile, a smile of wisdom and his very gentle way of guiding. That is a rare and precious thing. It has stayed with me all these many years. There are 3 more people on the program. I've been talking a lot. I'm going to turn this over to John Witte, then I'll close with Phil Woods. And Ralph is going to read a poem to us to conclude the program. So, John Witte, please.
Thank you, Ingrid. Well, when I arrived in Oregon in 1975, I found the Northwest to be like Maine, where I come from, except that it was bigger. In Maine, they like to say, well, Oregon is like Maine, but more so. Bigger trees, bigger mountains, and so on. And not only bigger, but more inclusive and less burdened than New England, burdened by his history, 400 years of history, culturally burdened, place of possibility. And when I learned that I'd be studying with Ralph Salisbury, the first thing I discovered about him was that he was a writer, very accomplished writer of both fiction and poetry. Something that you may think would be usual, but it's actually very remarkable, extraordinary, in fact, to be ambidextrous in that way. And that struck me. It's something I admire. This impression of Ralph as an inclusive spirit was enlarged by the discovery that he was part Cherokee, and that this heritage was explored and honored in his writing. Finally, after meeting him and beginning to work with him, I found Ralph's aesthetics to be consistent with his character. That is generous and open-minded, socially responsible, even a bit subversive. He spurred our efforts to be original, in a word, inclusive. Ralph once described to me, coming back after a spring break from Iowa, that he had gone to the graveyard in Iowa where his family members were buried, and discovered that there was a Witte family there. And he shared this in his usual kind of puckish way. And it made me think of the following poem, which I'd like to dedicate to Ralph, with thanks for his belief in me and his encouragement of my writing. A kind of lugubrious poem, but called Sonata. My grandmother is buried with others in a common grave in St. Louis, far from Poland, the place unmarked, a jumble of ribs and long bones and muddy hair. I think of her listening to a sonata, the convergence of two subjects in different keys. Mozart, like her, lost to us, lowered into a crowded pit, his wrist and finger bones that played so exquisitely, even as a child, confused with the shattered hands of others who simply toiled in a sweatshop in the New World, a music, a heaven, a pauper's grave, where our bones meet and mingle. Thank you very much.
And finally, a tribute from Phil Woods, who is in Colorado. Before I read Phil's tribute, I want to thank all of you again for coming. And we've gone over our hour, but thank you for staying. And after I read Phil's tribute, then Ralph will be speaking to you, and then we'll all go home after a wonderful weekend. So, Phil Woods. When I think of Ralph as a teacher and mentor, the phrase that always comes to mind is from Zen Buddhism, skillful means. That's what I experienced as his apprentice, that and a great deal of compassion. One night I brought a bad poem to the workshop concerning the awful things happening in El Salvador. I got blasted and chewed up pretty good that night, mostly by younger people. It hurt, but I didn't try to defend my poem. I saw all its weaknesses, but it was no fun getting carved up. It so happened I had a conference with Ralph the next day. The first thing he said to me was, "Phil, you know, your poem last night, it helped me to finish one of my own." He didn't tell me a bad poem was good just to make me feel better. No, skillful means he honored the moral intent of my poem because he understood and shared such ethos. That builds self-confidence and helps keep it going. I gather Ralph's tool bag was used for what each unique individual might require. Being his student was like gaining a very special and very wise uncle. I feel very blessed by the luck that brought us together, as I feel blessed by 43 years of a fabulous seminar with Ralph.
it's been good, speaking from my heart. This has been really, really good. I don't mean just the day, I mean all the years that we spent together. So here we are. Still friends. Glad for that. I'd like to read a poem that pays tribute to my teachers. And some of my teachers are better known than others. Robert Lowell was one of my best known teachers, but not many of you know Carol Crawford or her sister Enid, or all the teachers from grade school who taught me as a creative child in an impoverished situation. Were very good. So I appreciate all of them. And I would like now to pay a tribute of my own to some colleagues who are not here and who were teachers to many of you who are here. And I would mention James B. Hall and John Aislip and people who came in briefly who were a great influence, E.L. Mayo. And I want to say how grateful I am to have been a part of their lives and that they've been a part of your lives too. So I will read the short poem, a tribute to my teachers, and if there's time I might read another, but I think we're short of time, so I'll probably read just this one. My teachers, oops, keep forgetting this. My teachers, an appreciation and some recognitions. Mine snagged on thorns of literary study, I send my years of teachers, the centuries of poetry's roses, which seem to redeem varicose veins, river Styx slow flow into darkness, and hands quavery from restraining decades of urges to slap or to caress. The fingers so bold with zippers of lovers are now the eons informing under megatons of sea chalk, with which they will write numbers and letters until both teachers and learners' lifetimes, banged from erasers, become sun-struck dust, that snow gust sung, that cloudburst poem.